Let's go for it! I like the dark stuff. Give me the dark stuff. I like the dark stuff. Give me the dark stuff.
Hello, friends. It's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at The Dark Stuff. Thanks a lot for checking out the new video. It's our top 10 albums of 1983, and I'm rejoined by my friend Matt Larsen. He and I go back to eighth or ninth grade when we first started becoming friends, and we've been friends ever since. We've been discussing / arguing about debating music ever since then. Hope you enjoy this. It's a pretty deep dive. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody.
All right.
Top 10 of 1983. So, this was a strange one because I remember, you asked me about a week ago, like, would it be from the perspective of us back then in 1983 or where we are now? And it's like, well, I'd want it to be where you are now, of course, because you got the benefit of so much more wisdom and knowledge and whatever.
And a
also-
perspective of the record.
perspective, and I've reevaluated a lot of stuff that I hated in the 80s when I was a kid, and now I've turned around and I kind of liked it, because I was just wrong back then, and a lot of it was judgments I made on stuff I had never even really heard. It was just sort of like they weren't fitting my scene, so I just assumed they sucked and I wanted nothing to do with them. And I've reevaluated a lot of those bands, and so my top 10 of 83 is obviously very different than it would have been when I was 12 back in 83, and I imagine yours would be too.
Right.
But
Although
there are
some of
some
them-
things on there that are still the same. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let me start with my number 10, and
Okay.
here it is. It's Madonna, the self-titled album. This is probably a surprise to most people who follow this channel or who know me. Like, I don't think ever mentioned Madonna on this channel. But I gotta say, this is a good fucking album. It is like almost all bangers. It's like hit after hit after hit after hit. In 1983, I did like Madonna as a kid. I mean, I know I did. I was getting into hard rock and, Motley Crue and all that sort of thing. But I also did like Madonna. I had this album when I was a kid.
I bought the record as well.
I had the 12-inch for Borderline. I'm pretty sure I had Lucky Star 12-inch. I really liked Madonna through that and through the next album, and then I kind of phased out of it. But I was going back and listening to all these records. This was still solid. It's super simple.
Mhm.
It's right at the beginning of like the Lynn drum machine and just these really, really simple beats. It's not overly done or whatever. It's just like a catchy song and a really simplistic background. And I'm finding it like, I don't know. I really, really enjoyed listening to it again after a long time. And I almost was like, yeah, that's not going to be in my top 10. There's so many great records. But it's like, I don't know. Why should I just deny the greatness of that record? Because I do really enjoy it. There's not a bad song on there. Bands from like Sonic Youth to the Super Suckers cover songs off this album. I don't know if you call it like punk rock disco pop or whatever, but I mean, she had this weird attitude back then that just it was different. I mean, I don't know.
She had one hell of an A&R man who actually signed a lot of influential punk rock bands.
That is, yeah, because she was on Sire Records, and that was like pretty much, in my opinion, the best of the majors in the 80s. And you know what? Madonna funded all that stuff.
She probably paid for some Ramones records.
Madonna funded the Replacements. Madonna funded, all those Lou Reed and like all these bands that were on Sire that didn't make any money. Madonna was paying for it. But I don't know. It's a super enjoyable pop record. I don't hear anything that's this fun and just like loose and whatever. Maybe a couple of Katy Perry tracks in the modern era, but like for the most part, I don't hear much mainstream pop that's like just this fresh and just this good. And 37 years later, it still sounds great.
Yeah. And she influenced all those that you just mentioned, like the Katy Perry's, your Christina Aguilera. She sort of paved the way for all them.
Yeah, and
She was the first of
those videos were super compelling back then. I remember I always wanted to watch a Madonna video when it was on. I mean, she was really hot back then too, but I mean, she had this unique sort of look, and it was just different. Obviously, it had an influence on girls. Everyone wanted to dress like Madonna, all the girls did. But there's no lying. Guys looked at Madonna and were like, damn, she's really hot or whatever. So anyways, that's pretty much all I could say about the album. I just think it's like all bangers, really, really good, hit after hit after hit. And Madonna's never been that good after that,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
I like some of Like a Virgin. I think there's some really good stuff off there.
Yeah, I didn't like what they did to her voice on that album. They processed it so much and tweaked it so much. Like if you hear on Material Girl, it doesn't even sound like her almost. Her voice is like so fucking tweaked.
Mhm.
So I think it's a lot fresher on this first album. It was just like you usually, you come in, you're nobody, and you come in on a major label or whatever, and they're gonna try to make you something else. And it feels like they just kind of let her be herself on that first album. Then maybe
Well,
after a while they started.
and
pushing her a little
what's
bit.
it'll say? You have 10 years or half your life to make your first record, and then your follow-up record you have maybe 8 months. So
Yeah.
you'll have your whole life to make that first record. So I mean, it generally is the most compelling.
Yeah, and she was working on it for probably a couple of years, doing demos and whatnot with that Jelly Bean Benitez or whatever his name was. you know. All right, so that was my number 10. Let's get your number 10.
All right, my number 10 is Thin Lizzy, Thunder and Lightning. Thin Lizzy, I sort of got into later in life, not at the time. Thin Lizzy has gone through a number of different lineups, and this is his first record with John Sykes, who I think is an extremely underrated guitar player. He did a lot of work, obviously, with White Snake, and then he had a few of his own bands. But this is far more one of the heavier Thin Lizzy records. The standout track to me is obviously Cold Sweat, which seems to be the one that's held the most ground.
That's
of
a
all
great
of them.
song.
And,
That's a great song.
yeah.
Cold Sweat.
Unfortunately, Thin Lizzy has just never been one of those bands that have broken through in the States. If you go over to Europe, they're especially Ireland, they're darling. So, but yeah, that's my number 10.
No, that's a really great album, and it was up there on mine. I think for me, like that is the most metal Thin Lizzy album they ever made. It was the only album where, because of John Sykes, probably because his guitar was so much heavier, it did sound a little more metal. When they were on, I felt like Cold Sweat, Bad Habits, Heart Attack. Those were all killer tunes, but there were some I thought that were kind of cheesy and didn't
Probably fillers.
really up to snuff, with the classic Thin Lizzy, where you'd have like 9 out of 10 were killer, and maybe you'd have one kind of dumb song or whatever, but almost always they were great. This one was like, I like the sound, I like the heaviness, because Thin Lizzy always borderline, people were like not knowing kind of definitively what their sound sort of is, but like, I don't know. I did like it. If I had a top 20, I bet you this would be in the top 20. But it didn't quite make my top 10 because there was some filler on there, I thought, in my opinion. All right, let's do your number 9.
Okay, my number 9 is Mean Street. Y&T. They're from Northern California, and they sort of paved the way for a lot of hard rock bands. Motley Crue's very first show, they opened for Y&T at the Starwood. And if you ask a lot of those bands back at that time, Y&T was highly influential. They used to be called Yesterday and Today, but of course they shortened it to Y&T. And Mean Street's just the lead off. The title track is the strongest song, the lead off single. But Dave Medichetti is just a great guitar player, and he's playing. It's one of their heavier records again, which I tend to go to as the heavier stuff. And, you know, I mean, they're just a great, great hard rock band. I don't think sometimes gets the recognition they deserve.
No, I feel like they might have been a big regional band. Like if you
Yep.
were up there on the West Coast, out there on the West Coast, you were way more familiar with Y&T than you were if you were from Omaha, like you and I were. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't really hear that much Y&T until MTV. I never even heard of them until
Right.
MTV because they didn't play them on Z92, even though they played plenty of hard rock, but they did not play. Y&T was a little too obscure for them to get to on
Right.
the radio here, or predated when they were getting into new music. But yeah, I got nothing against Y&T. I mean, I have a best of in my collection. Um, you know, they're all right. I mean, I got nothing negative to say about Y&T. I did listen to this one a little bit, and yeah, Mean Streak, decent tune. Nothing else really grabbed me, you know. But I mean, I got, like I said, I got nothing against Y&T at all. You know, they're a decent band. My number 9 is the Ramones, Subterranean Jungle.
I thought
For
about
me,
that one.
which for me is an album that I used to think was kind of a weaker Ramones album. You know, like once they got into the 80s, they started losing it a little bit. But I've totally reevaluated this record because it does have some amazing tunes in addition to Psychotherapy, which was a hit for them. It also
Mm-hmm.
has Outsider, which is really good, one of Dee Dee Ramone's best songs, and he does the vocal on that one. They do covers of Little Bit of Soul, Time Has Come Today, that are both great covers. The production is 80s thin, you know, like really, really thin sounding drums and stuff. But it was weird. I was listening to the production, and it had this the drums sound like the drummer is like hitting a piece of paper, you know, like that's how thin it sounds. Like just, you know, so thin. And I realized that that's kind of what like the Husker Du drum sound became in the mid 80s. And I know they were big Ramones fans. I'm now wondering if this was like an influence on their what they wanted the music to sound like, because I'm hearing this and then I'm thinking of Husker Du a couple years later. Um, but this is a great album. I found out that the producer, Richie Cordell, is the guy who wrote I think We're Alone Now, the original song from Tommy and James, and done by Tiffany. He wrote Moni Moni. He was the producer of Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, I Love Rock and Roll. So he's been involved in some big records. I think they were thinking maybe this would do something for the Ramones, and we all know how that worked out. It never seemed to work out for the Ramones. You know?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, they never really had that big hit. Although Psychotherapy, I feel like most people know that one. You know, otherwise, I think that some of their once they got into the 80s, I feel like a lot of people have written them off. And you know, I don't know. I still I think up to about 87, 88 or so, they were still making really
What,
good stuff. And in the 90s,
what,
they were
what,
all right. You know.
what is weird though, you bring that up, that they were sort of ignored in the 80s. You know, I mean, I think probably the biggest decade for metal was probably the 80s. And on top of that, you had a whole punk rock movement starting with Bad Brains, Suicidal. You know, there was stuff really starting to bubble in the
Well, it
punk rock.
wasn't. I think all those bands were influenced by Ramones, but once again, it didn't accrue to the benefit of the Ramones. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you hear these. You know, it was always like the same with the Stooges or Iggy Pop. It's like every generation, there's always these groups of bands that are really into the Stooges and Iggy Pop and whatever, but it never really accrued that much to Iggy Pop in terms of having any kind of mainstream success. The Ramones were always just kind of existed on the periphery as a band
Right.
that everyone talked about. But shit, everyone was into the Ramones to a certain degree. I mean, I remember this. I don't know why I had this memory in my head. You might remember this. We went and saw, it was at Fat Jack's back in the 80s, okay? And you and I saw that band Tough, okay? Remember them? Okay? And they played Somebody Put Something in My Drink by the Ramones in their set. I distinctly remember that.
I don't remember that, but
I don't even remember
Stevie
a Tough song at all, but I remember that specifically.
was actually a skateboarder kid and kind of into punk rock before he got into, you know, all those bands like Motley and whatnot. So it makes sense. But he was way into skateboarding when he was younger. So
Well, I just remember that distinctly at that show. So I remember, okay, well, so if like a glam metal band is really into it, and all the punk people are kind of into it, and then you find out later, you know, it's like the Motorhead is super into the Ramones. They've got this kind of kinship and whatever. You know, Subterranean Jungle is not looked at as one of the better Ramones albums, but I feel like that should be due for kind of like a reevaluation maybe, because it's a solid album, you know, in my opinion. All right, that was my number 9, so I'm going to give you my number 8 here real quick.
Okay.
And this is one I know you hate, so I'm already, you know, I already know, I'm prepared. And it's REM Murmur, okay, their debut on IRS. Now, I know you know you don't see any real merit in this album. I get it. I'm fine with that. I knew we'd have some differences on the countdown. If 1983 me probably would not have been into this. You know, I didn't really like REM at that point. Didn't get into them until a little bit later. I'm looking back on this record, and it really is kind of. I mean, it's almost like there was a time pre-Nirvana and then post-Nirvana in terms of how music sort of looked. And in the underground world, there was pre-REM and then post-REM. Like, they had an impact on literally everything, and they ascended to the top of that college rock indie world so fast that, you know, they were already playing arenas and their contemporaries were still playing clubs. They shot up.
Your contemporaries being the Replacements. And the thing is, like, they sort of had the same timeline in a lot of ways. But the trajectory of one band went like this, and the other band sort of went like this, or had these little hills and valleys.
Well, you're right. And until I read that Trouble Boys book, I did not know how much of a rivalry there was between the two bands. But the rivalry was completely one-sided. Okay, it was the Replacements felt the rivalry towards REM. REM didn't seem to care. Like, they were just existing. They thought the Replacements were great. Pete Buck plays on Let It Be. You know, they took them out on the road a little bit. So it's like, you know, the rivalry was completely one-sided, but it really was intense, and it was all the way through their career.
So Tommy Stinson said, well, they get great Coke.
Hey, look, I mean,
that's what he had to say about.
Until that book, like I said, I did not understand the rivalry. I didn't know that, you know, the Replacements were big on. They signed to Warner Brothers first before REM, and then REM exploded when they got onto Warner Brothers. They were resentful of that. You know, they were introduced to Scott Litt, the producer, who ended up making all those big REM records. And the Replacements alienated him and pissed him off to such an extreme degree. I think they tied him up in a chair. They did like all sorts of crazy shit to him, and he was just like, "Fuck you guys," you know. And you know, so again, a lot of it was self-inflicted. Everybody knows that's the story of the Replacements, but
right, yes, they definitely know how to shoot themselves in the foot.
But you know, back to this one, it's like I think the feeling is that REM sort of played the game and the Replacements didn't. But I think that oversimplifies it, you know, and I don't think it gives enough credit to REM. They were a band that, I mean, Michael Stipe, most people don't know this, he refused to lip sync in any video. So all their old videos was him doing a live vocal over an instrumental track of the record because he would not lip sync. Now, it seems like kind of dumb now. Why would you make such a big deal of that? You didn't want to do it. So every single video of REM has a different vocal than you would get on the album. That's kind of cool.
I did not know that.
You know, if playing the game means, you know, they didn't pour liquor all over the president of the record label or tie up producers in a chair and fucking, you know, do stuff like that, well, then maybe they did play the game. They were a little bit nicer. But, you know.
Well, rock and roll, I think, is always been about making your own rules.
I think this album is great. It's not near the best REM, but it was like, this set the tone for so much 80s music. The whole underground virtually went with this REM sort of influence. And, you know, then REM just sort of shifted at one point and we're like, we're done with that sound. We're going to do something different. Their 90s were a totally different vibe. So, you know, I see why why Kurt Cobain was so like interested in their career, because I feel like they're one of these bands that managed coming from the underground, got into the mainstream, and there weren't a whole lot of people that were like, you fucking sold out, you know, you guys are what I mean, people criticized them at some point, but I feel like they always handled their success in a good way, you know. So that was my number 9, REM, Murmur.
Yeah. So now for something completely different. My
Yeah,
number
you
8,
get your number 8.
Bryan Adams, Cuts Like a Knife. You know, Canadian. It's a great rock record, great radio rock record. You know, I bought Reckless, which, you know, next record was Reckless, which was the big record for Bryan, and then went back and got Cuts Like a Knife. I think Reckless is a better record, but Cuts Like a Knife is a good segue to that. You know, it's funny with Bryan because, you know, there was rock and roll and hard rock. I always had to have long hair back in that time, and Bryan was this clean cut guy, and he could it was different, and I always loved the Cuts Like a Knife video, and with the girl jumping into the
pool, right?
empty pool, the empty pool, and at the end she comes up with her hair wet. I love
that. Yeah, that was a good video. I mean, you know, Bryan Adams I did like at the time. As a kid, I liked Bryan Adams. I had the Cuts Like a Knife album. I had the Next Reckless. I saw him back in '85 at the Civic Auditorium. Almost didn't, because me and my friend who I went with at the time, the show was sold out, and we were waiting in line at the Civic, and some guy offered us like $30 a piece for the tickets, and they were $15.
a lot of money at that time.
Right, and we almost were going to pocket the money at age 14 and then walk around downtown and then come back whenever like my mom was going to pick us up or whatever. But at the last minute, we didn't, went in, saw the show. So I did like Bryan Adams at the time. I will say it doesn't translate for me these days. You know, listening to this album, when I heard it a little bit and I was playing it on Spotify, getting ready for this podcast or whatever, you know, was it the worst of the 80s? No, not at all. You know, there was way worse stuff in the 80s. But Bryan Adams is one of these artists that I liked at the time, but to me it just doesn't translate anymore in 2020 for me at all. You know, even though he has a connection to Kiss, you know, I know
he
that
does. Well, he has a connection to a lot of. He has a connection to. He had this Little Mountain Studios was his, and that's where a lot of those bands went and recorded. Motley Crue, Metallica. You know, he had producers and stuff that came out of the Bryan Adams camp. I think that had a lot of influence. And Bryan's on Motley Crue's records. He's on Dr. Feelgood. He was, I don't know, but it's so weird. Like him now, he was supposed to actually, unfortunately, the pandemic, he was supposed to do a tour with Bon Jovi. And
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's actually a good package for what that is.
Yeah.
And Bryan's voice is held up a lot better than John's voice, that's for sure. But you know, he's somebody I never got to see live, which I always wanted to, and I was hoping to one of these days, hopefully get to see one of these shows.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know he was pretty upset that COVID-19 canceled some of his shows.
And he had a little Twitter rant or something.
Yeah, which, I mean, not to get into it too much, but I mean, I didn't think what he said was that terrible. I mean, no. He was pissed off. I mean, it was sort of selfish, like how everything affects me. Oh, I can't do these big shows. It's like, all right, well, I mean, I think your fans should be probably a little more upset. You're fine, but whatever. And you know, I didn't get what people were so upset about. I mean,
he is one hell of a photographer too. Like his stuff is printed. He's got photography books out. He gets his photography put in like all sorts of different magazines. He shoots all sorts of famous people. There's this whole other side to Bryan that really nobody really knows about. That his photography is pretty amazing, like high fashion stuff, which you'd never expect.
No, I guess Bryan Adams fell out of favor for me because he turned into kind of a ballad guy, after Reckless. And to me,
Unfortunately.
that's what he's known for now. It's sort of like how Bon Jovi, some of his
Mhm.
like harder rock days are kind of forgotten. And the way that Bon Jovi rose to success was really through the hard rock world. You and I
Right.
saw them open for fucking, we saw them open for Rat maybe and open for
I'm
somebody else.
over a Rat, open for Scorpions.
Right. And so they did that same trajectory that all these other bands, once they made it, then it was totally different. And Bryan Adams kind of went into that soft rock world, which is just pretty,
Triple A, yeah.
yeah, really lame. So, all right, that was your number 8. Let me get your number 7.
Number 7, another artist that I didn't really start to get into, and actually in the past 5 or 6 years, is Suicidal Tendencies and their self-titled album. As I was saying, and it's just I've gotta work with Mike, somewhat, and he's an amazing guy, and he is so DIY with everything he does. It's pretty amazing the business he's set up around Suicidal Tendencies, and as I was saying earlier, that punk rock was just sort of giving a breath of new life, and Suicidal and Bad Brains, and I know I'm thinking there's others that I can't think of at the moment, but we're really, sort of starting to make a dent in the underground world, and Suicidal were and they were banned from LA at one time. So
Just like
I
Black
mean,
Flag.
if you could get banned from your hometown,
Well, Black Flag was banned from LA for a
cool.
while too,
Yeah.
because every show was a riot or whatever.
So
No,
yeah, it obviously institutionalized being this big song off that record.
classic.
But
That's a classic, 80s classic,
yeah,
I
and
mean,
they're just, I mean, they're such an influential band on so many, and they sort of teetered the line between, especially in their later years, between punk rock and metal, sometimes leaning over more to the metal side, which I think they do more so now than obviously when they started out. But just, been working with them and being at numbers of festivals, like just seeing all the bands at these festivals will always go watch Suicidal. They're all influenced by them. They're just a very influential band.
yeah, no, like the fact that they were, when they started out, they were more in league with the punk bands, because I remember listening to this Husker Du interview with like Bob Mould, and he was talking
Mhm.
about, this was like 82, 83, and he was basically challenging Suicidal over who was the fastest band in America, and he was talking about how Husker Du is like the fastest, and he's like, well, Mike from Suicidal, he says that they're the fastest, whatever, so they were kind of peers of them and bands like Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and
Right.
that sort of stuff, which were the punk rock peers.
Well, yeah, they could also go off and do shows with Metallica and Slayer at that time too. So they were a band that could be accepted by 2 different genres.
Yeah, no, that first that album, it's funny because I mean I've never had a period where I was that into Suicidal, but I never didn't like them. They're always just like, they're just there. But Institutionalized is great. The song I Saw Your Mommy, but your mommy's
Of
dead.
course.
A couple of these, Suicidal Failure, a couple of Subliminal. There are some really classic sort of punk rock songs on that album that I kind of forget, because I think of them more now as in that late 80s, early 90s, where they had the slapping bass, that infectious groove stuff,
Yeah.
which I never really cared for that much. But like, I guess that's not Suicidal, but they were a pretty different band. I think Mike was the only guy that was like an original and still there.
Yeah. It's his thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's kind of what I thought. I mean, that's why it's like, yeah, but that's a classic album. I mean, no question. So, all right, my number 7, let's move on. My number 7 is, you also have it on your countdown at another point, but we'll get to that later. Shout at the Devil from Motley Crue. Okay. This is my first wave CD of it. Still have the same CD I had from back in the 80s.
Right.
For me, this is Motley Crue's best album. This is their heaviest album. I like the sound of it the best. I think it's the best sounding album they ever did in their entire career. I like,
Mhm.
the songs are really great. the lyrics aren't incredibly dumb like they are on some later albums. You know, Nicky still was writing about some interesting shit back then. He still kind of had something to say, you know. So that's what I like about the album. I feel like, I mean, look, this album caught me when I was a kid because I remember specifically for my bar mitzvah, making sure I told my parents to ask the DJ to make sure they had "Looks That Kill" by Motley Crue
Yes.
because I wanted to play it at my bar mitzvah, and that was spring of '84, so the album had already been out a little bit, but kids who were 13 were not into Motley Crue yet. You know, they hadn't been gotten that mainstream. But no, I mean, so many good songs on here. I mean, besides "Shout at the Devil" and "Looks That Kill," you know, you have like "Red Hot," which is great. 10 Seconds to Love, "Danger." So, anyways, I just think like this was like, you and I differ on Motley Crue. We both like the first two albums. Then I could kind of skip them for a little bit till maybe Dr. Feelgood, and then I kind of don't care what they do after that. But I just don't think they were ever as good all the way around, start to finish, as this particular album, as "Shout at the Devil."
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll get into it when I get in the.
Right, of course.
I think that's probably the best way to go about that.
My number 6, I don't have a physical one of this one. I thought I did, but I don't happen to have it at the moment, is ZZ Top "Eliminator." Now, I love the ZZ Top of the 70s. You know, that is probably their superior stuff, their better stuff. But ZZ Top, to me, like, first of all, this album was so big for me when I was 12 when it came out. Those videos, I was transfixed by those videos with the car and the 3 girls. And, you know, ZZ Top was barely even in them. I mean, every once in a while they do one of these, you know, and they were barely in the videos. But they were so good, and they kept the story going with the car and the girls and whatever. And it was just like, I don't know, they're one of the big 70s rock bands that was able to completely adapt and succeed in the 80s, whereas so many of their peers couldn't.
I mean, I love the earlier ZZ Top, and some of the recent ZZ Top stuff is actually really good. It's very heavily blues based. And you're absolutely right. Obviously a lot of that success has been driven by MTV and those music videos. And I think the director sort of made a point of it to have them sort of outside. They didn't lead the music videos. They sort of showed up at the end, or they were sort of there to help narrate in a way, because they would show up at different times, like going like this,
right,
or whatever,
doing these things,
or dropping the keys into the guy's hands, and sort of different. They were sort of made out to be somewhat of the heroes of the video. But
and also because they were older, you know what?
Yeah.
Young kids probably didn't want to see them as much because they're older. So keeping them out of the video as much is probably.
I'd much rather see. I know I'd much rather see the girls.
Right. Hey, and one of them had an Omaha connection. You remember this?
That's right.
Tina Tomasino, the girl with the brown hair, used to be the Z92 mouth girl in the late 70s, early 80s maybe. I don't remember when those commercials used to be on.
Hey, there's a hot time in the whole town today. Z92, the rock, lots of rock, new rock, classic rock. Z92 is the rock. You know why? Because Z92 has some variety, new rock and classic rock, for hours and hours. I was with a guy who wouldn't let me push his button to Z92. I forget his name. Z92 is the rock. Omaha's hot time. Z92, the rock.
But yeah, she was the girl in the video. Well, I mean, if you're not from Omaha, nobody remembers this, but who used to mouth the videos or the commercials on TV.
And she'd like wear a tight little half shirt or something, a Z92, the home of rock and roll.
Hey, she had a whole B-movie career. I saw a couple of her movies on Cinemax at some point in the 80s. You know, and then I think she married some rich guy, was one of those Real Housewives of something or other, you know, one of those type of shows. Anyways, those videos were impactful, but the fact is, even without the videos, Give Me All Your Lovin', Got Me Under Pressure, Sharp Dressed Man, Legs, TV Dinners, Just those, okay? All hits, great songs that are very memorable that you still know now, and you don't need the video to enjoy the songs. And some of the B-sides, like I Got the Six, Dirty Dog, they were still good rockers, you know? I think this album gets slagged a little bit because they started venturing into that synthy stuff with the electric drums, but they really only barely did it on this one. It was the next album, I think it was Afterburner or whatever, like Sleeping Bag and all that, where they fully embraced that 80s synthy sound. And there was very little of the old ZZ Top in it, but Eliminator was not that. Okay, that was my number 6 was ZZ Top Eliminator. Your number 6.
My number 6 is Slayer, Show No Mercy, the first Slayer record.
Great.
Well, yes, which I, didn't get into Slayer maybe in the past 15 or 20 years I got into Slayer. This really, I mean, they're part of the big three, obviously.
Wait, I thought it was the Big Four. Did someone get
Big
cut
Four,
out?
excuse me.
Did someone get cut out? Did they
Sorry.
fire Mustaine again?
Actually, if you're going to include, it should be the Big Five, but they were sort of in this just exodus. But they weren't never really that big, but highly influential in that scene. Slayer, it's funny because a lot of the thrash scene really is considered coming out of the Bay Area, and Slayer was an LA band and came up to San Francisco and played those formative years, and the Bay Area thrash scene was giving them a hard time because they were wearing makeup and lose the makeup. But I really, it was the beginning. It's not my favorite Slayer record, but it's the beginning of what was to come, and just probably my favorite of the Big Four bands. They were so damn evil back then too.
And I don't disagree. They're my favorite of the Big Four without question.
And one of the best drummers, I think. Well, not only who also is now on Suicidal Tendencies, Dave Lombardo, who has such a signature drum sound. It's amazing what he brings to that band. I mean, you hear these current albums without him, you can see that there's a missing part to it, and that would be Dave Lombardo.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Slayer. As far as the Big Four, they're my favorite of the Big Four, mostly because they're the most consistent. They never felt the need to try to change, whereas
they liked their box.
Right, Metallica.
Kerry King once said.
Metallica kept changing. Anthrax kept changing. Megadeth, I don't follow them enough to really even care whether they change enough. I just don't. I've never liked Megadeth. But Slayer, the production on this album is pretty weak. It is pretty thin and whatever. And Tom Araya really didn't learn how to do his vocal thing just yet. He was kind of more of a screamer on this album than he kind of was when you get into. I mean, he screamed in a lot of Slayer, but I mean, he didn't really have the range yet on this album. And I didn't even know who Slayer was in 1983. At that point, I first heard Slayer when they did In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida on the Less Than Zero soundtrack.
Yeah,
remember that? Great soundtrack. And
that was like 86 or 87.
Yeah, and it was them. The Bangles were on there. Aerosmith was on there. LL Cool J, Poison, O-Ran, Juice Jones on there. Anyways, that was a great soundtrack, and that turned me on when I heard their version of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. That made me interested in Slayer, whereas I kind of thought they were too extreme prior to that, but for some reason, when I heard that, it gelled. Show No Mercy is probably the last Slayer album that I ever got into because I would go kind of, their peak period was like the mid to late 80s into the 90s, and I still like their 2000 stuff. I mean, I thought that, the albums themselves are maybe not great, but they always have a couple of great songs on there on each.
God Hates Us All is an amazing record.
That was a great record. The one with God, what is it called? World Painted Red or something.
That's one more of the recent ones. That's like 2 albums.
That's the more recent one. Yeah, that was like 2 albums ago, and it had that song Hate Worldwide, which
Yep.
I thought was an amazing single. I used to play that song just over and over and over. But as far as Show No Mercy goes, that was in my honorable mention list. It's a great album that grows on me more and more and more the more I listen to it. But I had to say that compared to some of the other records that were in '83, I couldn't see myself putting it on there because I'd have to take off something that I just thought I liked so much more. So it was hard for me, but that's one that just didn't quite make the cut, but close.
Mhm.
Okay, that was your number 6. Why don't we get your number 5?
Okay, my number 5 is also a band in the same sort of wheelhouse as Slayer. It's Metallica, Kill 'Em All.
Record.
I mean, that I'm probably not giving that as a high of a position as I probably should, but there were records that I felt more then and now. But that record changed music basically.
Absolutely.
That record I didn't get into until later years. I didn't get into them and probably until sort of the tail end of right before Master of Puppets, in the tail end of the Ride of Lightning periods when I really started to get into Metallica.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Yeah, they I mean you listen to that record now, and at the time when you heard that record, this is the heaviest shit you've ever heard.
It
And
sounds so tame now. I mean, it's
it
still
is, yes. It's just sort of like, it's almost like a pop record, but in a way, like the songwriting, there's a lot of structured like pop songs, which, it's just with a different topic and the tones are different. But it's just such a great album title. Great. It's how a metal. It is one of the best debut albums of any artist. It's just an introduction to and they grew as a band in a lot of good ways. I think. I mean, when you get in the late '90s and when they all started to cut their hair, it got sort of. That was sort of their leaner years. But they were trying to adapt with the times, and Metallica, I think I like that they go out of the box. I mean, if you look at, there's an awful record called Lulu with Lou Reed.
They're one with Lou Reed, yeah.
Yes, it's a terrible record, but I like when bands take chances like that. And I mean, they're comfortable in that position that they can do something like that and still bounce back. And
yeah, but you know what? We're all gonna love that album in 20 years, and here's why.
Okay.
Lou Reed fans hate it. Metallica fans hate it. Nobody likes that record except the artist that made it. And I think someday people are going to reevaluate that record. I personally don't like it. I'm not saying it like I think it's great. I don't. I think it's boring. But they're going to reevaluate that, and that's going to be looked at more fondly in the future. I just have this feeling, because how could someone so iconic as Lou Reed and a band so iconic as Metallica get together and it's just a piece of shit? No, I think it's that nobody gets it right now at the moment. We just don't understand what the fuck they're doing. And maybe in the future we will.
Very well could
the
be.
fact that it alienates both artist fans, I don't know anyone that likes that album, honestly.
Not a better person that likes it.
I mean, spoiler alert. So that's why I think it's destined for greatness, honestly. Spoiler alert.
I'm sure the band would like to believe that. But.
Well, apparently, aren't they giving that one away? Like Metallica's, I think you can just download Lulu for free. Metallica really doesn't care. And you know how hyper they are about internet.
The fact to say you can't give that away.
Yeah. But spoiler alert, Kill 'Em All is later on my list, so I won't say too much about it now. I'll talk about it later, but agreed with what you said. I mean, the songs were, Metallica later on could definitely be criticized, even on their great albums, as getting a little too proggy almost, like the songs got so long. There were so many different parts and there were so many whatever. And They didn't do that on this album. I mean, it was way more streamlined. They were just great riffs, and then one riff for the verse package, and then they go into the chorus with a different cool riff, and then they have solo time, and then they go right back into the other riff, and it's just, it's great. I hear it now, and it's like, I can't believe this was considered so extreme, considering how catchy the songs are.
Mhm.
But you know what? In 1980, Ozzy was considered the craziest, most dangerous fucking whatever out there. Now he's Grandpa Ozzy, and his songs are played at sporting
And
events.
he's had dinner at the White House. Whatever thought that.
Right. He's had dinner at the White House, and you can't go to a sporting event where they don't play Crazy Train.
Right.
So it should just, it is pretty amazing. However, I will say this, going back to Slayer from a minute ago, none of their stuff sounds tame or mainstream at all, still today.
Still as brutal as fuck. And I was lucky enough to go to well, I don't know if I believe it, their very last show.
Yeah.
But,
Well, look, I was fortunate enough to see them a number of times on their own. I saw them on that package tour that they did back in the 90s.
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans. I
That
saw
was
them
very
with
fun.
I saw them with Marilyn Manson on that tour, where you really saw the difference between Manson, who's kind of heavy, versus Slayer, who is fucking metal. And it was like, you don't realize the difference until you see them one after the other. And then it's just like, wow, Manson seems like a pop cartoon compared to what I just saw with Slayer, like unbelievable. But anyway, side note. So yeah, Metallica, we agree, is just a classic album, and I will say more on it when it comes to my turn, because Metallica's on my list as well, so it will be coming up. So that was now I'm going to jump to my number 5. Okay, and that is this album, The Meat Puppets 2. Now, someone in the comments is probably going to say, dude, that's a 1984 album. We're talking about 1983. I don't know, because all I know is if I look at mine, and I'm going to do this thing, my jacket, it says, you can't try to see.
Focus. There. Yep.
It says 1983.
Yep, 1983.
Okay, so fuck all the other people who say it's 84. Maybe it was, SST didn't have a lot of money back then. Maybe they just didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't get it out there till 84. But this album, in addition to being the album that Nirvana covers 3 songs from on their Unplugged album, which is why a lot of people sort of went back and reevaluated this. It's also been covered by the Minutemen. It's also been covered by, God, I can't remember who the other one was. But this album is so good. It's a great mix of punk and folk and like sun-dried, like the Southwest. It just feels like the Southwest for some reason, like Arizona, New Mexico. It just has that dry air feel or whatever. Their lyrics are so interesting and so just like perplexing. I couldn't tell you what they're about ever. I mean, I don't know what any of these songs are. They sort of don't make linear sense when you're just reading the lyrics or whatever, but they're so good. And they have this instrumental called I'm a Mindless Idiot. It's so catchy and funny. You're just like, yeah, this makes you feel like a fucking idiot, like listening to this weird pattern of chords or whatever. So
how long is the song?
About 3 minutes or so.
That's one of their longer songs.
On this one it is. And the Meat Puppets' first album is really kind of forgettable. So the fact that this was only their second album and it's that good, just
It must have been Van Halen fans. I mean, they got their album.
Well, and the Meat Puppets obviously benefited a great deal from Kurt Cobain giving him their blessing at that time when he was able to do something like that, like just wear a band's t-shirt and all of a sudden they had a fucking contract. The Meat Puppets did have some hits in the 90s, and that's what the mainstream knows them from, from that, I can't even remember what their hit was. I know the album was called Too High to Die, but I can't remember what the hit was. But, this album is just such a unique sounding album. And I can't think of anyone else that sounds like this. And I think maybe that's why it didn't initially connect with me before. But now when I go back, it's like I honestly like every single song on here. Oh,
Got nothing on them.
You got nothing on them,
Never
huh?
really. never really got the
Well, yeah, if you'd probably remember their 90s singles. If I remembered, I could tell you, but I'm drawing a blank on what they were called. They had two kind of moderate hits, but it was so different. It was kind of like the Butthole Surfers were another classic 80s underground band that existed throughout the entire decade of the 80s. They got to the 90s and they had sort of a brief flirtation with the mainstream. They had like a hit or two, and then they just kind of went back to where they were.
big record contracts.
Say again?
Then Nevermind got released, and then they all got big record contracts.
Hey, that's true.
You know, good for them. Good on them that they got that. Yeah. Made some money.
It did. You know, I mean, honestly, the power of Kurt Cobain wearing a T-shirt with your band on it in 1992, 93, that could literally get you a record contract.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was that influential. It's sort of hard to believe that anyone had that big a deal back then. He actually was. Okay, that was my number 5. You've done 5. So let me go to my number 4.
Okay.
My number 4 is Kiss, Lick It Up. Such an important album for me because I was already a Kiss fan before this, but this kicked it into overdrive for me. I was like, went from being like a casual fan to being obsessed, which the way I was in the 80s, you know, I was pretty obsessed with Kiss in the 80s. And this album was really it. You know, Creatures of the Night, the album from the year before, is technically better than this, but because so many people listened with their eyes, you know, nobody gave Creatures a chance, and their makeup look was kind of considered dated at that point, and they were over the hill. So they had to do something to reinvent themselves. It works. Give credit for like a good idea, because this is, even though it's just the 4 of them standing there, this is an awesome cover. I think
the question is that even really Vinnie Vincent's body? Because there's a debate about that.
Yeah, because the arm sort of disappears right there, kind of.
Yes, and you don't see, and that there's a big debate whether that is his body or not.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that I, from what I read in that Kiss and Sal book, I feel like the band was upset that he showed up with a pink shirt. You know, like the deal was we all wear black, and like the guys show up in black, and then he shows up with a fucking pink shirt. So I feel like that is really him because of the fact that they were annoyed that he did that, because he always did shit like that, which is unbelievable that, you know, he thought the whole thing was about him. But look, to his credit, he wrote 8 out of the 10 songs on here, co-wrote 8 out of the 10 songs on here, and every song on here except for All Hell's Breaking Loose is good. All Hell's Breaking Loose is pretty cringy. I mean, that's just dumb. But
that's
what? Okay, well,
my favorite song off that record.
It's cringeworthy to me. I can't listen to it. What be this? What be that? You know, I'm like, no.
Dude, that's rapping.
I know, but it sounds goofy now. But look, Exciter, Not for the Innocent, Young and Wasted, Give Me More, A Million to One, Fits Like a Glove, all classic tunes.
On the 8th day.
What's that?
On the 8th day.
And on the 8th day, Dance All Over Your Face. You know, all of these are good, except for I just don't like All Hell is Breaking Loose. But look, I love this record. It was super important to me back when it came out. It made me a huge Kiss fan that I am today. I still enjoy listening to it.
Now, did you go see them when they played there with, I think it was Heaven and Girls School?
I thought Vandenberg.
Did you see that?
Vandenberg. I thought Vandenberg.
Oh, yes, the Vandenberg in Girls School. That's right.
Yeah,
Did
it was Vandenberg. Yeah, I was there. Yeah. It was because it was the same week. I remember Genesis and Kiss were in the same week at the Civic Auditorium. And that was really, really hard for me to get my parents to agree to take me there for 2 different shows in the same week, because that was like really pushing it at age 13. But I did. And yeah, that Kiss still had that, you know, it's hard for people to remember if they didn't see Kiss in the 80s, but you know, it wasn't a family band. There were a lot of dirtbags at those shows. You know, that was the Kiss scene back in the 80s. They weren't the biggest of the big anymore. They were just another hard rock band that was out there, still touring at the arena level, but every year there was another band that would sort of surpass them. But fuck whatever, they were trying back then, and I think this is the last all the way through good Kiss record that ever was. Because I think Revenge is overrated. And I think
so.
all the 80s stuff is.
I think I've gone back to Asylum, and I think Asylum's a really good record. Horrible album cover.
Yeah, no, Asylum is pretty good. I'll give them Asylum. That's not bad. I just I just feel like as an album, Lick It Up was really when all four of them were together and they were working on a common thing, and it was like Animalize, how Animalize was Paul's record and Gene's record, and then they just sort of put them together. And Hot in the Shade was like mostly demos that Gene and Paul had done separately with other people.
But I love that tour because that's when they started to go back and play deeper tracks.
It was. They did the long set. They did more 70s stuff. Opened with I Stole Your Love, and no, I remember that tour. That was great. That was it was just a great Kiss show because the last time they were on a touring cycle for Crazy Nights was when they had bottomed out, and their Omaha show, there were less than 3,000 people at that show. It was bad. I mean, it was embarrassing.
Didn't Paul say something about ordering a pizza?
Yeah. I don't remember that. I remember I'll never forget this, that when they were playing Reason to Live, Gene Simmons was like yawning during the fucking song, like on purpose, So that was okay. So anyway, but Lick It Up to me is in my opinion the last really great Kiss record. But that's obviously a debatable point. But that's why it made my number 4. And now let's get your number 4.
My number 4 is Dio Holy Diver. That I bought it at the time. Loved the record. Obviously, come up. Rainbow in the Dark led the whole thing off.
Great single.
And you just go. I mean, it's just. Every song's a great song off that record to me. Straight Through the Heart is my favorite track off it. And a lot of it, it's just a simple metal record. There's a lot of space in it. And I think it just sonically sounds great. Obviously, he had a lot to prove, Dio did. He put together a great band. Vinny Appice, or it depends on it, Appice on drums, Jimmy Bain on bass, and then Vivian Campbell on guitar. And that lineup, I think it lasted for like 2 records. It followed, and then that lineup changed after the follow-up record. But just, it's not a bad song on that record, and that's. And actually this past year I've been listening to that record a lot lately for some reason.
Well, no, Rainbow in the Dark is one of the best metal songs of the 80s, no question. Holy Diver, the title track, is really good. I didn't used to really care much for Dio back in the day. I always thought I didn't get his imagery, and I always thought he was a little Dungeons and Dragons-y for me, like a little bit, but over the last couple of years, I have really warmed up to the Rainbow stuff with Dio. I don't really care much for Rainbow unless Dio was the singer, because after that, they got a little too mainstream. And I really do like those first 2 albums he did with Black Sabbath. Even Live Evil is pretty good. So I have a new appreciation for Dio because now I get him a little bit more. Holy Diver, I liked. It wouldn't have been in my top 10 for sure. It probably wouldn't have been in my top 20, but I do really enjoy it. And the undeniability of like Rainbow in the Dark as being just such a fucking great song just stands up for, classic stuff.
And like his voice held up all the way through the unfortunate end of his life. Whereas, what happens with most people at age, your voice tends to go with age.
Right.
His did not. His held up. And it just, I don't know, just amazing singer. Yeah, some of it, especially that later it gets a bit Dungeons and Dragons. But man, I mean those first two records, especially Holy Diver, just I
No,
really
you know,
listening to it loud in my car.
I probably appreciate that a lot more now than I did even at the time, because like I said, I wasn't a big Dio guy in the 80s, because a lot of the stuff, you know, Dio and Maiden and stuff, I didn't really get into at that point. I got into them later, kind of looking back. I did like Maiden, you know, but I wasn't like a huge fan. They weren't one of my bands really. But Dio was never one of my bands. But again, it's someone I've reevaluated over the last couple of years. And because I got into the Rainbow stuff so hard, you know, I didn't think I was going to like that. And those two Sabbath records, you know, I want to listen to more Dio and to see what I can get more out of the 80s stuff that I didn't before. I did go back and listen to Elf, his old band, pre-Rainbow. They're not that good, dude. I did not like them. They were very typical early 70s, kind of a little bit of folk rock, a little bit of prog rock, a little bit of hard rock, a little bit of nothing, you know, just a whole bunch of nothing. So I tried going back for Dio even pre-Rainbow, but I wasn't feeling it, you know. I tried. Why don't you do your number 3?
Okay, well, it's one that you've already mentioned, but this is a little different cover. Kiss Lick It Up, Japanese version. So, from my understanding, but you still have the original cover, it's like a slip in there. And I think the reason this came out is because Kiss was still very big in Japan, and they were all very much still in the kabuki makeup. So they led with that. So I guess it could grab the eyes. And it was a 10th anniversary of Casablanca. So
when they did Europe on that tour, the advertising still showed them with makeup, and then they walked on stage without it. I mean,
I mean, as I said, All Hell's Broken Loose is my favorite track on the record, but there's not a bad song on this record. And you can still put it on and it still feels fresh today. You know, I was sort of the same as you. You know, the last Kiss record I bought was Unmasked when it first came out. Then I lost interest. I liked Unmasked. I have a new appreciation for Unmasked now. I love that record. But The Elder was just like, I was completely checked out on Kiss at that time. And then I heard some of Creatures, and I saw the I Love It Loud when it came out and loved the song. I didn't buy the record, but when Lick It Up came out, I was reinvigorated into the band again. And, you know, you pretty much summed it up, everything about it. And, you know, and it was Michael James Jackson produced Lick It Up, which he was also the producer on Creatures of the Night. You know, and they're back to their heavier sound.
They were never that.
Well, they were probably the heaviest they've ever had been, actually.
Right.
But even though it's the same thing goes, like when you heard Kiss in the 70s, you thought that was pretty heavy. But you know, it really probably
they're doing like Young and Wasted and stuff like that. That's heavy for '83. You know,
very
that's heavy. That's heavy Kiss stuff. And they
it's
were
heavy. I mean, it's just as heavy as probably the heaviest. Well, with the exception of Metallica and Slayer, who are just starting to put out this stuff. This was the heaviest thing at that time. You think of the other heaviest bands at that time were probably Iron Maiden, and that was just as heavy as anything Iron Maiden was putting out.
Probably more so because Iron Maiden's noodling always made it seem less heavy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Like because they had that prog element and all that soloing, all that noodling, which I love. But I mean, you know, it's not a put down. That's just a statement. You know, it's like a lot of that noodling. But no, yeah. So we're both in agreement on Lick It Up. That's just a great album. That's funny that you have that Japanese version because you know back in the '80s, I ordered that mail order and never got it. I paid money, never got the record, and I just let it go after it's been 30 years or more.
Well, I didn't buy it at the time it came out. It was something I picked up later on.
No,
when
me
I
too. It was years later, but it was pre-internet, so I bought it from my dad's magazine.
I can't remember if I did buy it in Japan though. 'Cause I did go to Japan about 2 years ago.
That's right. You went to Japan. Interesting.
So, okay. And you want to go with your?
Yeah. So that was your number 3.
3.
So I'll do my number 3. Is X More Fun in the New World? I don't have a physical of it. That's the only X record I didn't physically have, except for their brand new one that just came out. X is one of those bands that like I really, really love now, and I didn't give them the proper attention back in the 80s. I was aware of them. They were on MTV. There was no way to define their sound back then. I mean, they were more rock and roll, but they got affiliated with punk, but then they weren't that punk, and then they were more just like kind of college rock before that was a thing. They were. It was so hard to describe, but they had such great. I mean, I don't know. This was their 4th album in a row to be produced by Ray Manzarek from The Doors. It was the last album before they sort of tried to go mainstream, because their next album was produced by Michael Wagner, which Michael Wagner from the 80s. I mean, he was a big mainstream producer at the time. And he did an album with X, and it had a hit. At Burning House of Love was a hit. But
Michael produced a lot of the Dokken records.
Yeah, did he do a Motley Crue album too? Didn't he do a Motley Crue?
I think well, Tom Werman did the sort of more notable Motley. I don't think Wagner did. I could be wrong, but I don't think he did a Motley record.
Well, but more so. Anyways, this X album is really good. It's the end of their original era, because when they did go to production with Michael Wagner, apparently the guitar player Billy Zoom had a real problem with him, and he did not like the way the record turned out. He quit the band. They brought in another guy, and then they did one more album and broke up, and that was kind of the end of X until they got back together in the late 90s.
It is a weird matching to bring Michael Wagner in on a X record, considering I think he's German, but his work with the Scorpions is what kind of got him noticed. And then after, because I think the Scorpions introduced him to Don Dokken, and then that sort of relationship happened. I mean, he and Michael Wagner produced, I believe, a Black and Blue record. I mean, he's sort of into that 80s hard rock world.
Right, and I don't know if that's what Elektra, who was their label at the time, if that's what Elektra sort of thought X was
well,
to. I mean, I don't know.
You know what? And you know what? Dokken was on Elektra, so he's doing a lot of business with Elektra. So I don't know. They didn't share the same A&R guy.
I mean, look, it could be. I don't know as much inside baseball stuff about X as I do about some other bands. All I know is this was the end of John Doe and Exene Cervenka being a couple and also being in a band. Okay. Doesn't always work out like Fleetwood Mac. Like, you can be a couple and then be a band for a long time after that. It was a problem for X. They weren't as good when they weren't writing together anymore. And they were sort of, they were still in the same band, but they weren't a couple. And I think that it's changed the nature of X. Obviously, losing Billy Zoom changed the nature. But on this album, they still had it all there. It was still that rarin', like, kind of rock, kind of rockabilly, great lead guitar from Billy Zoom. Cool lyrics. They do a cover of Breathless from Jerry Lee Lewis. That was one of their better known songs in the 80s. The song I Must Not Think Bad Thoughts was a really good single off this one. So, not my favorite X album. That would be probably their debut, Los Angeles, but it is still a really, really excellent record. And like I said, the end of that 4-run X album period, where every album was great. And then it started getting a little suspect after that, but all right, so that's my number 3. I will do my number 2 now.
Okay.
Right, because you did number 3. Okay, so now I'll do my number 2. My number 2 is dun, 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 The Replacements.
Of course.
Okay. Now, this was a contender for my number one. It ended up at my number two, but mostly because, I mean, I love this album. You know, it is so them. It has raging punk rock like Run It and You Lose and Heyday, just great. Their style of punk rock, not that dissimilar from Sting and Sorry Ma. You've got Treatment Bound. They're drunk, they're wasted, they're doing this song about how fucked up they are, you know, whatever. Within Your Reach, Paul's solo song, his great, like, really sort of, you know, that sort of sad loser ballad thing that he really perfected in the 80s. This was the beginning of that with Within Your Reach, and that was the only song where the rest of the band's not on it. The song itself, Hootenanny, great joke. They all switched instruments and they play. You know, not a lot of bands would do that. Open their album with a song where they're all switching instruments and they don't even play that well. It's sloppy as fuck. You know, like that's how they introduce the album.
Shooting yourself in the foot.
You don't get bands that do that shit like that anymore. Yeah, and the artwork done by Grant Hart of Husker Du, rest in peace. So great artwork. I like it's called Fake Name Graphics, but that was Grant Hart's. He did the art for it. Just a great album. You know, I don't know how else to say it. Color Me Impressed is one of the best songs of the 80s, in my opinion. Just that expression became a bigger deal even than the song. You know, the expression Color Me Impressed. So I don't know. I love this record. I know most people probably go for, you know, Let It Be the next year, or Tim the year after that. But I kind of like these probably better than Let It Be. I don't know about better than Tim, but yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't get cooler than this.
That's one of my honorable mentions. I mean, it's sort of Color Me Impressed. Obviously, is such an amazing song. But when I go to put on a Replacements record, that tends to be one of the last records I put on.
Well, I mean, yeah, my go-to nowadays has been Sorry Ma. I play that one a lot more than anything. I love that one. That's just, you know, every song, and just the lyrics that Paul Westerberg spit out at age like 19, 20, you know, were just so great. More so than even Pleased to Meet Me. And
that's my go-to record.
And that's a great one, and I love that album. But you know, nowadays I probably go for Sorry Ma or Hootenanny, just because I love that the Bob Stinson, you know, contributions and stuff like that. And he was still a major part of the band at this point. You know, it wasn't like on Tim where he kind of showed up for one day of recording and, you know, they just jammed for like 30 minutes all fucked up, and then they sort of cut those in and made them solos later. You know, he was fully contributing at this point. So this was the real Replacements. Just a hint of the greatness, but man, I mean, I love this album. That's why, you know, it's my number two. It's hard. It was hard for me, but I kept it at my number two. All right, your number two.
My number two, I mean, this record was just so damn, I mean, this.
Look at this. I got it myself. I got it too.
There you go. I mean, when you're, how old was I? I was like 13 or something at the time. And getting this, I mean, and this was my introduction to the band. I didn't know them prior to this, but
yeah, me too.
I mean, it's not a bad song on it. It's sort of hard. It's sort of like heavy metal pop music in a way. You know, I think their best records are their first three. I do like Hysteria, although it started to take a different route because I like the heavy guitars.
Well, look, I'll say this. You know, a lot of people say that the first Van Halen album was the blueprint for 80s hard rock, and there's a lot of truth to that. I think Def Leppard Pyromania was the other side of that blueprint because that so many bands heard the way that album sounded and they wanted that big sound, and that was like, so you know, it was more palatable of metal. It was more,
accessible for radio, I think, than like your, Dio, who came out that year, or even Motley Crue, or even obviously more than Kiss. It was more of a palatable rock, hard rock record. And like the great players, I mean, Steve Clark, I think is Stephen Clark, was known as that time. Such an underrated guitar player. It's great. So, I mean, obviously Mutt Lange was the guy,
Right.
who was the guy on with a lot of their more notable records. I got to see them on that tour. They did 2 sold-out nights in Omaha at the Civic Auditorium. I
was there too. I was there too.
Yep, with Uriah Heep opening up. I mean, it was just great.
I just remember how big they were. It was, I mean,
Yeah.
if a band got to the point where you and I at age 12 were like going to the concert, they, I mean,
Yeah.
2 nights at the Civic.
And the thing is, that success didn't kick in over in the UK. It was all American based. Like their success didn't really catch up to it until Hysteria. And because they would saw interviews or heard interviews with them, they would be mobs of kids in LA or in the States, and then they'd fly back home and nobody would be there, and they'd just be able to walk around like normal people and go to their local pubs. So it was really interesting. And I think a lot of that had to do with MTV, because I don't even know in Europe, that there was no MTV.
Well, the irony was Def Leppard always wore all those British flags that year too. So
Exactly.
like they were wearing all this British shit, and like nobody cared about them in England.
Exactly. I mean, but it just and I think they have it in them. I really wish they'd do one more hard rock record. And when last time I saw them, they did a residency in Vegas a few years ago, and the opening band was better than them, and the opening band was them playing the deeper tracks.
Oh, really?
It was so good.
Well, the funny thing is, I last time I saw Def Leppard was on the Hysteria tour. I saw them on Pyromania and Hysteria
in the round,
and I've never seen them again.
Was that in Lincoln?
That was when you and I saw them in Lincoln with LA Guns.
LA Guns,
and we went and met LA Guns. I still have my signed album, which is signed by all 5 original members, because I know there's a bunch of different LA Guns now. I got the original guys, the 5 guys on the first record, all signed my album. So that was, Def Leppard was a big thing for me in '83, and Pyromania was kind of an honorable mention for me. I mean, it was great. I feel like as great as that album is, certain albums meant more to me, like the Motley hard rock, like the Motley album, the Kiss album. They hung around with me longer. I went probably 15 years without playing a Def Leppard album. Because I was just so over them, and what they were doing in the 90s seemed so silly to me. They were just like, but whatever. The fact is, they're still here. They can still fill arenas and stadiums and whatnot, and all of their contemporaries are barely getting by in clubs and stuff. And so whatever, that's the power of that stuff. But it's a great album. It does stand up, close to making my list, but just not quite. Great anyways though. So that was my number 2. So we both done that was your number 2. We both got number 2. So now the moment of truth. Let's do our number 1s. I'll let you go first.
Okay.
Okay, so give me your number 1, your best album of 1980.
It was on your list as well.
All right. Oh, we got the black cover too. Nice.
I just get geeked. I still look at this and get goosebumps. This is still the original album that I bought back in '83. I mean, it's such an, I mean, I can recite In the Beginning. Still, I have that memorized. It's just, they were sort of the LA metal scene. They really, I mean, there was Quiet Riot that got signed first, and I never well, I never got Quiet Riot,
No, me neither.
but this thing came out, and it sparked a whole wave of LA metal bands from getting signed, like, and you just had to have, I guess, the hair and the looks, and you would get a record contract if you were from LA. But this record, it's dark, it's scary, it's sexy, it's fun, it's everything that you kind of want.
Well, they really played up the dark imagery on that record,
Yeah.
tour, and everything.
Well, it was, you know what, I think a lot of it was inspired by Mad Max, those movies, especially with the way they dressed and whatnot. Because Mad Max, Beyond Thunderdome, or whatever film that came out around that time, sort of had the characters in the film sort of had some of the same imagery, like post-apocalyptic shit. Like,
yeah, everything's on fire behind them there.
Everything's on fire, sort of wreckage in the scene. They're in their production stages like that, and, you know, they're, you know, and Ozzy, obviously MTV had a lot to do with helping them. Not really a big radio band at that. Radio didn't really embrace them. They didn't embrace a lot of those types of bands at that time. But Ozzy taking them on tour obviously was a big break for them. And if you've seen The Dirt, you know the kind of the story around.
There's some notorious antics on that particular tour.
Yeah, it just, you know, I don't know. And I've been lucky to be able to work with half the band throughout the years. And
no, look, it was my number.
As contrary, they kind of are the real deal in a way. I mean, that you go see them live now, half of the, you know, there's a lot of bells and whistles. But yeah, there's still that, honestly. Nicky still is the way he writes, and very passionate about the way he writes. And as you said earlier, like those songs are far more serious and about the youth and the youth in the streets. And, you know, you get in the later records, like, you know, I'm not a big fan of Dr. Feelgood because it just sounded like Sticky Sweets and stuff like that. It just kind of were a little bit cheesy to me. I think the Theater of Pain was an underrated record because they looked like a bunch of girls, but the record didn't sound like a bunch of girls. And Home Sweet Home, I think, is will be a song that's going to be played for decades. It's such an iconic song and whatnot. Well, that's a later record, but I mean, they've had their hills and valleys in their career and their sounds. I actually kind of like their last full-length record that they did. I thought that was the best thing they've done since probably Theater. Well, with the exception of the Karabi '94 record, which I love dearly.
Yeah, I know you're going to get that in there.
There's a small contingent of their fan base who agrees with me. But, you know, it's a small.
Look, I'm sure. And then there's probably some people out there who really stand by that Gary Cherone album with Van Halen, but
I don't know.
I'm not trying to say John Corabi is the same as Gary Cherone. Look, not to go off on a tangent, but I don't blame Gary Cherone for why Van Halen 3 sucks.
No,
it's on Eddie and the band because they're the ones who wrote the fucking boring.
Exactly.
But anyways, no need to go off on that tangent. But yeah, no. Look, this was my number 7, so obviously it was still a big deal for me, that album.
Mm-hmm.
They've never been that heavy. They've never been that dark, you know, in terms of the whole imagery of what they were doing back then. It was scary. It was, you know, I would have thought in 1983 counterintuitive to go full-blown devil, shout at the devil, and put that pentagram on the cover. And, you know, if you're trying to get mainstream, I don't think that's the way you would go. But you know what? It worked for Motley Crue because they were very successful with it.
The thing is about Motley Crue, which is so not marketing and on brand, is what Motley Crue did is with each record, they had a different logo, they had a different theme. Like if you look, the logo from Shout at the Devil is different from the logo from Theater of Pain, which is different from Dr. Feelgood and different from Girls, Girls, Girls. Then the thing is, too, which every record, they had a different look. Like these guys, they were like, you know, Mad Max, you know, Thunderdome. Obviously, Theater was more glammy. Girls was more biker look.
Biker look.
But the thing is, if you look at like, if you should keep your same, 101 marketing is that you need to brand something and you should probably keep your same logo throughout, which like what Kiss has done. And most bands, Ozzy pretty much has done the same thing. But Motley did the exact opposite, but it worked for them. But you never, I mean, the replacements, even like bands that are not into that world, like Replacements at REM, they pretty much kept the same logo throughout their career.
Metallica.
It's just something that I've always found very fascinating, but that has worked for them. But
Look, Motley Crue is a unique situation. You know, they come out and it's sort of like they seem like they're very influenced by Kiss and that sort of thing. Like they're doing that sort of thing. But then they move it into a heavier realm, and then it seems like they're in this other world, and then they go full glam for, you know, like you said. So they moved it around a lot. I just feel like Shout at the Devil was their most consistent all the way through.
Not gonna argue with you.
Right, every song there is good, and like I said at the time, and you concurred, the songs seem to be a little more about something. You know, look, I like Girls, Girls, Girls as much as the next guy. You know, but at the same time, how many songs can you write like that? You know, besides what what was the other one off that record that was a big one? Oh, Wild Side.
Wild Side.
Wild Side, great single. But, you know, then I can't really tell you too much of what else is on that album besides those two singles. I still remember, even though it's 37 years ago, all the songs on Shout at the Devil, right?
Yeah.
I still remember it because those songs are more ingrained in my brain. I've forgotten most of what the Girls, Girls, Girls album is, what's even there, except for the hits. So, anyways, that's why that album stands up. We'll move on. That was your number one. So, Shout at the Devil, Motley Crue, your number one album in 1983. My number one album has already been talked about. It was your number 5, but it's my number 1, Metallica, Kill 'Em All. Just like on my last countdown video, I sort of surprised myself with this one as my number 1. But, you know, I got to say that most people who remember Metallica from the 80s that are our age or older, that were there before they were the biggest band in the world, you know, almost everybody from that period says Master of Puppets is the definitive Metallica album. Like that's the
I would probably agree with that. That's probably my favorite.
And I was always under the impression that that was my favorite Metallica album because it is really great. But I have to say that now that I'm more removed from the metal world, you know, and I don't really follow a lot of the new stuff, but I still love what I loved before. If I feel like playing Metallica, I generally don't play Injustice for All. I generally don't want to play Master Puppets anymore or Ride the Lightning. It's just always this. Every single time. All I want to hear is this one.
And what is interesting, you look at that album cover, you listen to, you would have never thought that 37 years later that they would be the biggest band in the world and could fill stadiums in Bulgaria.
Look at those ugly motherfuckers. I mean, are you kidding me? That's the biggest band in the world? I mean, no way.
It's crazy.
So, yeah, no, I hear you. Every song is great. You know, I know that James Hetfield became a better lyric writer as the years went on through the 80s. This is still a lot of, you know, Motor Breath and Metal Militia and, you know, songs about headbanging and stuff, you know.
Which I think is fun. At the time, I thought it was kind of cheesy, but now I think those songs are endearing and fun.
They are. Look, No Remorse is great. Seek and Destroy, Metal Militia, Jump in the Fire, Motor Breath. I mean, yeah, they might seem sort of corny to a certain degree, but at the same time, they're just fucking great. And they do have that mix of like, yeah, that late 70s, early 80s new wave of British metal. They had a punk influence. Obviously, they were into punk bands and such, and they started covering the Misfits shortly after this. You know, Misfits had a really heavy record this year too that Metallica ended up covering a couple of tunes from. But no, and this just really did shake up. It changed the world. It is true. I mean, it didn't have that like instantaneous change. Whereas like Nirvana, where it sort of flipped a switch and like everything was different all of a sudden. But you notice 2-3 years later, everyone wanted to be like Metallica. It used to be like everyone wanted to be like Eddie Van Halen, or everyone wanted to be, it was, no, Metallica is it. They're the example. And since they did it their way, they didn't compromise. They never, you can write off some of their 90s stuff, and I definitely would. But throughout the 80s, they became the biggest band in the world, not because they changed or anything. They just
they didn't put out their first music video until Injustice for All. I mean, at that time, it was standard to do a music video, and they resisted everything previously.
Right. No, I just, I am at a point now where, I own every Metallica record in existence. I have all of them, not some of the live stuff.
You have Reload?
Yeah, I got Load, Reload. I have the whole studio catalog on CD, but I just don't ever want to play that stuff. I have no interest. I'm not a hater of the Black Album. I think there's some good stuff on there, but I never feel like playing Metallica except for this. The last 2 years, every time I want to play Metallica, it's bam, hit the lights, let's go. I just don't need
unintended.
Yeah, I don't. So I don't need any other record. It's almost like this could be it for me. And I never thought that their debut was like that strong. I've always been a Master of Puppets guy, but I have really shifted over the last couple of years. And I'm a kill 'em all guy as far as I'm concerned.
Very good, very good.
There's just so many great ones, and I don't know. This was really interesting because we didn't have a ton of overlap. We had 2 albums that overlapped.
Mm-hmm.
3.
Or no, yeah, you're
Motley Crue,
3.
Kiss, Metallica. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we had 3 that overlapped. That just shows. We had 17 different records there.
Mm-hmm.
And, heck of a year. Heck of a year for metal. Heck of a year for punk rock.
Absolutely.
And a heck of a year for mainstream music.
Yeah.
Madonna, The Police, ZZ Top, and all these bands were huge that year.
There was a lot of hookers and cocaine running around at that time, I'm sure, with all the money the labels were making. Oh, my goodness.
Would have been fun.
Jeez, Synchronicity had to have gone diamond by now, as well as Madonna.
They were playing stadiums. They were playing stadiums, just them. And I know the Go-Go's opened up for them on that tour.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they were the biggest of the big. And frankly, I respect the fact that they just said, look, we can't get any bigger. Like, what else are we supposed to do? And so they just ended.
Well, and not only top of that, they hated each other with a passion. So they didn't want to be around each other anymore. They made their money.
Yeah, they got rich on that. And, to me, I always thought Sting was very boring, but, that's a side note. I never liked his solo material. I always thought it just lacked the oomph, from the Police, but that's neither here nor there. We've done our top 10s, so that will end the program here. So,
all right. Good time.
Thanks for giving me your best of. And
thank you for asking.
Yeah, and anyone wants to leave comments, feel free. But keep them respectful, I guess.
Yeah.
People get all passionate.
All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Another great top 10 and a little side analysis there at the end. Please leave your comment below and let me know what you think. Did we miss something? Am I totally wrong? I'm not totally wrong, so, feel free to put that. But anyways, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Take care.